Story one, you weren't really the outdoors type, none of us were. Milo just had this idea stuck in his head about disconnecting, trading Wi-Fi for pine needles, and beer in the woods. He sold it to us like a pitch. Craft brews, hiking no one else knew about, and a cabin that looked like it fell out of some forgotten storybook. 6 of us agreed. Milo. Theo with his girlfriend Wren. Harper. Devon and me. The cabin photos hooked me. Wide porch. Wood dark as old soil. Windows like unblinking eyes. Milo claimed it sat in the Smokies, straddling the Tennessee-North Carolina line, remote enough that it barely had an address. We didn't ask further. By the time our car rattled, up the thinning gravel path, the last threads of daylight were unraveling. Branches crowded in, sky shrinking to slivers. Reception blinked out. When it appeared, the cabin looked right port rail worn grey, citing the color of burnt bark, but standing in front of it was heavier than seeing a picture. The windows didn't catch the sunset. They swallowed it. No reflection. No life inside. Just void. We dragged our bags out without comment, as though words might echo wrong. Inside smelled like cedar, but faintly sour, as if wood and dust had been holding their breath for decades. The generator was cold. Milo said it needed a kick to get running. But water ran in the sinks. That small luxury calmed us. Rooms were claimed quickly. Harper cracked open the cooler. Theo slipped music from his phone through a tinny speaker. Something meant to sound soft, but filling the silence like static. The night was uneventful beer. All stories retold until after thinned. But Wren sat quiet, eyes snagging at the dark, panes of glass. I asked if she was all right. She half smiled. I thought someone was standing in the trees. She whispered, like she couldn't decide if it was a joke. We were uppity. Milo swore he'd found a hidden trail, no markings, no tourists, just a ghost path to a ridge view. He showed us a chipped red slash on a stone as proof it started there. From then on, it was instinct. The trail wound narrow, sloped cruelly, overgrown in places like it wanted to erase itself. Old paw prints scored the dirt. If people had been here, it hadn't been recent. Milo led with his phone's dim cache map. Devon brought up the rear, unusually tense. 10 minutes in, he froze, mid-step, staring through the brush. You don't see that. His voice was flat. See what? Milo asked. Devon's mouth opened, then closed. He shook his head. Never mind. Something stretched tight in the air after that, a thread we didn't acknowledge. Wren grumbled about the climb. Theo tried patching it with humor that didn't land. Harper, the one who usually couldn't stay quiet, barely spoke. I caught myself glancing behind more than ahead. A mile or two in, we crossed a dead fall tree angled strangely upright. Harper stopped, face pale. That's the same log, she muttered. They all look the same. I said, no. She snapped. Don't. Milo forced a laugh, like he could smooth the fear back down. Trail déjà vu. That's all. Then we came to the sign, rust bleeding through warped metal. Nailed to a tree being eaten by its own bark, fresh letters scratched, jagged. Do not pass private land, I said, though my voice didn't buy it. Or some creep's campfire art project. Milo smoked, but the sound faltered. We pressed on, the woods dimmed. Not night yet, but the color drained. Birds gone. Even the insects seemed to have fled. Silence felt deliberate. The path bled into a clearing. 6 stumps sat in a ring round a shallow pit of ash. No signs of a fresh fire. Still. Wren placed her palm on one. It's warm, she whispered, then pulled her hand back fast. Like she'd said something forbidden. None of us sat. We moved on quickly. But the trail didn't bend. didn't rise or loop. It tunneled forward, endless and changing. Finally, we turned back. Relief almost settled until the clearing returned. The stumps weren't tearing anymore. They stood in a row, facing the trail. Wheating Wren broke down first, tears shining in the strange half-light. Theo didn't joke this time. Devon's jaw worked silently. Milo fumbled out his compass. "We're cutting west." He muttered, "No more trail. Just raw brush, branches to skin, thorns caught clothes." But we forced a line forward. After an hour, Harper stopped dead. The cabin stood 20 feet ahead. We hadn't looped. We hadn't turned. It was simply there wrong. Sudden, impossible. Its porch light was dark. Our window opened by an inch. The front door swung back and forth on its own rhythm. Milo approached. Like he'd been expected, we followed Dot inside. Everything was ranged the same, dust and touched. But carved into the couch fabric, crude letters read, "Welcome back. You never left." Dot. No one spoke. Milo cut his flashlight. We laid our sleeping bags on the living room floor in a defensive circle. None of us slept. I only listened. Near 3 a.m. The floorboards above groaned. One slow step, then another. Measured, patient, as if counting down. Devon whispered, voice hollow, "There's someone on the porch." We looked. Nothing outside. When dawn finally bled grey through the trees, Milo's sleeping bag lay zipped shut, perfectly smooth. His boots stood neatly side by side at the door. His back leaned untouched against the wall. Milo was gone. We tore through the cabin, screaming his name, every room, every corner. Nothing. By noon we stumbled into a ranger station. We spilled everything. The ranger nodded. Asked for the rental listing. I handed him Milo's printout. He studied it without expression. A week later, they called me back. The listing didn't exist. The contact info was fake. The coordinates we'd given led to a ruin burned decades ago. Hunting cabin. 6 dead inside. No survivors. I haven't touched a trail since, and I haven't spoken to any of them again. Story: Tweed quit school half a year earlier. Burned out and drifting. My days blurred together. Odd jobs, food delivery, and too many hours spent sleeping on friends' couches. One rainy afternoon, I noticed a poster on the window of a laundromat. 3 days of volunteer conservation work in the Ravenport Hills. Free meals, travel covered. And even a modest payout for someone like me. It felt like a lifeline. Work with a purpose, a roof over my head, something to occupy the gnawing quiet in my mind. When I showed up at the rendezvous point, a park warden waited by a dusty SUV. His name was Harris. A weary man in his 50s with a sun-creased face and a voice as flat as gravel. He passed me a paper bag with a sandwich and said I'd be joining 2 others clearing a disused trail near Black Hollow Creek. No cell towers past the ridge. Shouldn't take more than 3 nights. He added, something in his tone wasn't reassuring. It felt more like a warning, but I nodded anyway and climbed into the rattling vehicle. By the time we arrived, the sky was bleeding into twilight. Harris only gave one piece of advice. Don't cross the creek. No maps, no markers, just that line. The cabin waiting for us looked barely alive. Crooked walls. A stove that looked more like junk than heat, and one oil lamp perched on a nail. The crew was already there. Jonah, soft-spoken, his words almost swallowed by a Georgia drawl, and Kira, sharp-eyed, restless, the kind of person who seemed to catalog every sound. We shared cold beans and crackers in silence that night. Somehow, the quiet meal felt heavier than small talk. I fell asleep hard, grateful just to stop thinking. Morning brought something odd. On the porch sat a canvas sack stuffed with tools loppers. I saw bright yellow tape. None of us had seen it arrive. Kira muttered that maybe Harris had dropped it off before dawn. But even she didn't sound convinced. Still, we went to work. Jonah hacked steadily through brush. Kira tied strips of tape to mark the way, and I dragged debris with the rake. The rhythm soothed me, sweat stinging my eyes, muscles aching in a good way. That piece didn't last. When we got back, every pack had been opened and zipped neatly. Nothing missing, just exposed. It was worse than theft. It felt like intrusion, like someone had been curious about us. Kira slammed her bag shut with shaking hands. None of us had much to say. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling when I heard its soft, rhythmic whispers just outside. Not words, exactly. More like a low chant, pulsing in patterns too deliberate to be wind. I didn't move. I could hear Jonah's steady breathing beside me, Kira's restless shifting. But the voice was outside. It finally faded, but sleep didn't. Come after that dot the next day, every strip of yellow tape we'd placed was gone. Not shredded, not blown off, just gone. Kira cursed, but her anger sounded hollow. By evening, it escalated. The tools we'd left stacked on the porch had disappeared. We searched everywhere until Jonah found the saw blade shoved beneath his sleeping bag. His face went pale. None of us believed he'd put it there himself. We didn't try to sleep that night. We sat pressed against the wall, lamp guttering low. Then came the sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, circling the cabin. Once, the latch on the door rattled just enough to test it. Then silence. It was worse than if someone had broken in. It felt like being studied. When dawn came, the tools were back on the porch, tied together with one last strip of yellow tape in a neat bow. To neat, a message, not a mistake. We packed and left without a word. Back at the ranger station, Harris just shrugged, probably a black bear. He said, maybe he believed it. Or maybe it was easier to pretend. But I know what I heard, what paced round us in the dark, even now. Weeks later, I can't shake it. Forests don't feel open anymore. They feel like walls closing in, like eyes behind the trees. Sometimes I dream of whispers syncing with my heartbeat, and when I wake, the silence feels worse, because it reminds me of that unspoken message. Story 3 was 23 when it happened. My cousin Marissa and I had been planning a mountain weekend for months, nothing fancy. Just a couple of days away from work and noise, hiking in the day, board games and wine at night. That kind of trip. But the night before we were supposed to leave, she called with bad news. Her supervisor dumped a last-minute project on her. She'd join me late the following evening. So the first night, I was on my own. Honestly, I didn't mind. Solitude sounded like exactly what I needed, just me, a rented cabin, and some podcasts. I left before noon, grabbed a stale turkey wrap from a gas station outside Waynesville, and wound my way into the Smokies. The cabin was tucked into the tree line outside a town with the almost too perfect name of Stillwater Gap. Smaller than the pictures made it seem. Rough pine boards, a crooked porch swing, and a front door that needed a shoulder shove before the lock caught. Inside was basic, but livable, a narrow kitchenette, a couch sagging in the middle, and a laminated welcome binder with scribbled notes from the owner. Inside the binder was a folded map, trails highlighted in colored ink. One route had been circled several times in thick black pen. Crow's Path Loop, for miles, well maintained. Someone had written beside it, good starter trail, safe for solo hikers. That felt reassuring. By 4 o'clock, I had laced up my boots and headed out. The trailhead wasn't far, just past a weathered fence and a broken wooden sign. The first stretch was quiet in a pleasant waybird song, the crunch of leaves, the creak of branches swaying in the wind. Every so often, a wooden marker painted blue guided the way. The first two appeared just as expected. The third made me pause. It was far too close to the last one, practically within sight of each other. Stranger still, I recognized the same crack down its middle and the same rusted nail bent at an angle. It wasn't just another marker, it was the same marker. I tried brushing it off. Maybe I'd gotten turned round without realizing. But then it happened again. Same wood, same paint, same splintered edge. It was like someone was moving it just ahead of me, keeping pace. I slowed down, uneasy, and that's when I noticed the footprints. My boots left a deep tread, big blocks, offset slightly to the right. Right beside them was another set, perfectly parallel, same size, same pattern. For a moment, I thought I doubled back, but the prints weren't beneath mine. They were next to mine. Someone had been walking in sync with me. I froze, listening. The woods weren't silent. But the background noises suddenly felt wrong, like they were filling in for something else that should have been there. I even called out, half joking, half serious, "Anybody else out here?" My voice cracked too loud against the trees. No response. The trail began twisting unnaturally. Sharp angles that didn't match the terrain. At one point, I reached her, fork left and right. I chose left. Walked nearly 10 minutes, only to find myself back at the same fork. I tried right. Same result. My phone's GPS dot was just hovering in blank green space. Even the compass needle spun erratically, refusing to settle. The sun was dipping fast. My nerves shot. I stopped caring about the loop or the map. I just pushed downhill. Desperate to find anything familiar, every instinct screamed at me not to look behind. The pressure in my chest was unbearable, like something weighted just over my shoulder. I pushed faster, nearly jogging, until the trees abruptly parted. There it was, the cabin. Relief washed over me so hard I almost laughed. The porch swing, the chipped red trim, everything exactly as I'd left it. I hurried forward, but then I saw it. The front door was open, just an inch, maybe two, not swung wide, just cracked, enough to show the dark seam of the interior. A deliberate kind of open. I knew I had locked it. I never forgot to lock doors. Then my eyes shifted to the window. The curtain had been closed earlier. Now it was tugged aside, just enough for someone to peer through at the woods. At me, my stomach dropped. I didn't go closer. I left my pack in the dirt, backed away, and turned. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice. I locked the doors the second I got in and tore down the gravel road, headlights bouncing. I spent the night in a motel near a shuttered diner. Bathroom light burning until dawn. I didn't sleep much. Every creak felt like it was following me. The next morning, I drove back to return the cabin key. I slid it across the counter and muttered something about plans changing. The woman at the desk started to ask, then thought better of it. Just nodded. Marissa met me later that day. I never told her what really happened. Just said the cabin felt off. She laughed, called me soft, handed me half her sandwich. We stuck to tourist traps and overlooks. It was fine. But I never went back into those woods, because the memory of those twin boot prints won't leave me alone, and some nights I still dream of that cracked door slightly open, as if someone is waiting for me to step inside. Story from my shift at the visitor kiosk ended right as the last of the daylight drained away. Instead of heading straight back to my small cabin on the edge of town, I decided to cut through one of my favorite stretches of the Smokies. That road always feels like it belongs to another world. Tight turns, branches knitting together overhead. The scent of resin and damp moss sliding in through the vents. Driving it had become second nature, almost ritual. The evening began like any other. My thoughts buzzed with half-formed reminders, things to restock tomorrow. Whether I had enough coffee filters at home, maybe even the cobwebs clinging to my porch lamp. But about 10 minutes past the turn-off for a Klingman's dome, I noticed headlights sliding into my mirror. A white SUV dot at first. Nothing unusual. That road sees steady traffic. And I've dealt with my share of impatient drivers. I figured they'd pass, except when I eased toward a turnout, slowing just enough to give them space. The SUV slowed too, not drafting, not overtaking, just hovering, perfectly measured. I forced a casual act, pulled over fully, thumbed my phone like I was lost in social media, hoping they'd roll on. But gravel crunched behind me. The SUV slid in close. No wave, no acknowledgement, just an idling hum, close enough I could hear the fan belt whine. My skin prickled. I pulled out again, pulse thumping, telling myself they were tourists, disoriented by mountain roads. But then the pattern started. Every time I tapped the brakes, they mirrored it. Every acceleration, they matched. My rear view was nothing but glare, burning my eyes until I had to blink hard to see the curves. I tried a trick I'd used before, ducked onto a gravel service road only locals bothered with. It twisted up into old growth forest, sharp rocks scraping. Under the tires, for a moment, the headlights vanished. My relief was so strong it nearly hurt. But then, beams knifed through the pines again, cutting across the slope, bouncing wildly as the SUV barreled after me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't someone lost. I yanked the wheel hard, reversing course, shooting back onto the asphalt at a speed no sane driver would risk. The Smokies blurred into streaks of black and silver as I pushed for town. Gatlinburg's glow hovered in my imagination, a promise